Dawn arrived the way it does in dry places, thin and colorless at first, a breath pulled through the teeth of the desert. Inside the county morgue, fluorescent lights hummed over a plain pine coffin. A clipboard rested on a metal cart. The intake note was short. No next of kin. No discharge documents on file. Cremation set for Friday, 4 p.m. No honors authorized. On the property tray sat a scuffed military watch with a cracked crystal, ticking a beat slower than the clock on the wall, as if it had learned to keep time by memory. Maya Torres stood beneath the humming lights and read the file a second time. She was used to forms and rules, to boxes that told her where to sign. She was not used to the way a watch could feel like an eye. "He shouldn't go alone," she said, barely above the sound of the vents. Across town, in a cinder-block garage that smelled like hot rubber and coffee, a phone vibrated on a workbench. Ridge, the elder of a small local motorcycle club, had his hands inside a tire when the voicemail began to play through a tinny speaker. Maya's words were careful, official. The name she spoke, tentative. Caleb Rowan. People called him Grizzly. Ridge stopped and stared at the wall as if the mortar lines might answer him. He pressed call back. It went to voicemail. He left 6 words and his number. "If it's him, we'll come." Caleb Grizzly Rowan had lived years at the edge of notice, present without splash. He worked where hands were needed, seasonal crews at federal job sites, a shed behind a mechanic's shop where he tuned carburetors, favors that didn't want receipts. He learned to travel light. A fold of clothes, a toothbrush, a battered backpack. He kept a corner at the Sun Mesa Library, a seat near the back where the light was kind. He picked up trash at the park when no one watched. He had not married. He kept few photographs. The one in his wallet was a Polaroid whose corners had softened to suede. It didn't show his face. It showed a hand, his, holding a banner edge in some long-ago wind, the background a corrugated wall. Memory worked that way sometimes. Details tight as knots, faces blurred. At his wrist was a small winged mark, not the kind to belong to any one banner or club, just ink that meant flight to him, or freedom, or the way silence lifts when engines start. And in his pack, carefully folded, was a worn field banner whose colors had washed to smoke. He carried it the way some people carry a prayer they do not speak out loud. Sun Mesa sat at the lip of the desert. The veteran desk at the county office was 2 chairs and a file cabinet. People did their best. The wind did its best to erase their footprints. Ridge knew that. Stone knew it too. The road captain whose patience lived in his hands first and his mouth second. Their club had a name that sounded like a myth, Iron Seraphs. But they didn't live like legends. They weren't Sunday school, and they weren't trouble either. They just showed up. Back at the morgue, Maya filed the intake and carried the tray to her desk. The service box on the form was blank, the kind of blank that bothered her. It wasn't her job to decide what the blank meant. It was her job to find out if it meant anything at all. She looked at the watch, at the hairline crack across its face, and thought of all the things that survive by being careful. She dialed the number on an old flyer from a community book drive, a contact for the club. A digitized voice accepted her message. She spoke the name again, clearer this time. Caleb Rowan. She asked for a call back if anyone knew him. After the click, Maya stood very still and listened to the room. The morgue had its own silence. It wasn't the silence of reverence. It was the silence of rooms built to hold what the living couldn't carry. Across town, a man who hadn't cried in public since the service leaned on a workbench and felt his ribs go tight around a name. Ridge wiped his hands, dialed another number. Stone picked up on the second ring. The older man didn't waste words. Sun Mesa, County Morgue, might be grisly. There was a pause, the kind that tells you two people are looking at the same road. When? Stone said. Tonight, Ridge answered. After hours. We go as friends, not as colors. Night put its palm over Sun Mesa. A guard buzzed Maya through a door. She kept her tone even when the attendant reminded her of hours and rules. Yes, she said. I know. She had learned that the fastest way through a wall was sometimes to speak quietly to the mortar. Ridge and Stone arrived without patches, helmets black and unadorned. They parked away from the light, the way you do when the moment is not about you. Inside, the air bit at their knuckles. They stood by while Maya read the basics again, drawing a map of facts on paper that had no room for memory. When she lifted the sheet, the watch ticked on as if it had not been asked for permission. Ridge looked at the man in the coffin, and then at the scar near his shoulder where old work had once gone wrong. He checked the watch, the way it sat against the skin. He didn't say the name. He didn't have to. 9 times out of 10 was enough to get your boots moving. We'll need to verify, Maya said. Policy is clear. She folded the file. So is conscience. Ridge gave a small nod. We'll look, he said. If it's grisly, we won't be late. He wrote down 2 places to start. The library, a kid who sometimes sketched in the back. Threads to pull in a town woven thin. The morgue door clicked behind them. Outside, the desert air smelled like creosote and dust. Stone exhaled into the dark. We'll come quiet, he said. We will, Ridge answered. Friends, not colors. In the morning, the library opened with the soft clap of blinds. Ms. Vega rolled her cart between stacks and paused at the back table out of habit. The chair there was pushed in just so, the way he used to leave it. She didn't know his last name until Maya spoke it. She knew the watch. Everyone who paid attention knew the watch. Maya walked the aisles with a folder hugged to her ribs. She introduced herself quietly, aware that news has a way of echoing in rooms built for whispers. Ms. Vega listened and let her thumb rest on the spine of a paperback. When Maya finished, the librarian took a ring of keys from her pocket, opened a tin box under the desk, and lifted a card. It was a library card, plastic scuffed to cloudiness, the signature small and careful. C. Rowan. Ms. Vega set a pad of tracing paper over it and brushed a pencil sidewise to catch the stroke pattern. She held the rubbing to the light. He always apologized if he brought a book back late, she said, even when it wasn't late. Maya nodded and wrote the detail exactly as it was spoken. Specific truth has a weight that general truth can't carry. Did he ever mention family? She asked. Only that he didn't want to be a burden, Ms. Vega said. Then, after a breath, he stayed to stack chairs after closing. He said quiet rooms needed tending. She looked past Maya to the back door, where the morning glare cut a blade across the floor. He wore that watch even when the band pinched, she added. Said it kept time better than he deserved. A boy hovered near the periodicals rack, working a sketchbook against the rail, pretending not to listen. Maya caught his eye and recognized him from Ridge's list. Toby Lane had a summer's worth of freckles and the unhurried confidence of kids who fix things themselves. Toby? Maya said. He closed the sketchbook halfway, a hinge of paper and caution. Yes, ma'am. You knew Caleb, Maya said, not a question. Toby glanced at Ms. Vega, who gave a small nod. He opened to a page where graphite had learned the curve of a watch face. The glass was cracked, the bevel dinged, The band improvised with a loop of paracord. He'd drawn it from memory and from the times Caleb had pressed his wrist close so the boy could see how the hands flickered in cheap light. "He told me not to buy a new one," Toby said. "Said a thing that still works doesn't need replacing. Just patience." The boy's knuckle dusted eraser crumbs from the page. "He showed me how to move the notch so it wouldn't bite my skin." "Would you be willing to bring that sketch by later?" Maya asked. "We're putting together what we can." She did not add for who. She did not need to. Toby nodded. He tore a clean page from the back and began again while they spoke, lines working faster this time, as if the act might keep a door from closing. Behind the library, in the narrow shade where deliveries came and went, Ridge and Stone waited with their helmets in their hands. They didn't say the name aloud. They did not have to. Ridge watched the heat shake on the tarmac and measured errands against time. "We asked the county for a hold," he said. "A short window, a few days. That's all we need to do this right." Maya made the request in the measured language of people who ask for exceptions so rarely that when they do, the room listens. She sent a verification packet up the chain, a formal request to the Federal Records Center with what they had. Name, approximate age, service hints, old work ledgers listing C. Rowan on federal job sites. She flagged the case in the system and typed the honest note. Possible veteran. Community support identified. Hold requested for private farewell arrangements pending confirmation. The answer wasn't no. It was the kind of paper yes that lives in a narrow hallway. A few days. Enough if they kept their feet moving. Word passed among the club the way it always did. Few calls, fewer words. The guidance was plain. No patches, no colors, black helmets, no photos. They would arrive as friends and leave as shadows, the kind that protect more than they cover. Stone tuned 2 bikes in the garage until their idle was low and even, engines softened to a heartbeat you could lean on without waking anyone. Maya returned to the morgue with what she had. The attendant signed the hold receipt and slid it into a manila folder. The room hummed. She set the library rubbing beside the watch on the tray, a quiet pairing. She wrote a small note on a scrap of paper and tucked it under the strap. You were seen. No one would read it who needed to read it. That was fine. Some messages are written for the air and the future. Evening settled into the seams again. Ms. Vega arrived with a ledger she kept for volunteer nights, columns ruled in pencil, dates and initials neat as prayer beads. He never asked for credit, she said, so I gave him a line anyway. C. Rowan appeared in the list like a refrain. Toby came with his sketch tucked in a school folder. He held it like something that could bruise. Maya laid the drawing beside the watch and stepped back. The likeness reached toward the object, the way a son reaches toward a father he recognizes by the way the man turns his shoulders. Ridge, who had not allowed himself softness in a long time, placed a finger on the paper and then on the metal, as if blessing both. They signed in at the desk and asked for a room. The county clerk looked at the form and at the hold notice. She explained what they could not do and what they could. The county rep slid the form back. Without verification, there's no flag, and the schedule holds. Maya placed the memo on the counter. Discretionary hold. County's reasonable judgment. I'm exercising it. A small room for a private farewell. No public viewing. No procession advertised. Ridge and Stone nodded at each line as if they were reading a map through mountains. We understand, Ridge said. We'll be quiet. They were. When the attendant wheeled the coffin into the small room and closed the door behind him, The air changed the way it does when a door knows to mind its business. Stone set a battered pack on a chair and drew out a folded cloth. It wasn't ceremony. It was memory. The colors had fallen to dusk long ago. The fabric smelled faintly of oil and sun. It had been with Caleb to places the county file would never know to list. Ridge smoothed the cloth and looked to Maya. "It's personal property," she said softly. "Not a flag. In this room, it's allowed." They unfolded his worn field banner, personal, not ceremonial, and squared its corners anyway. No one spoke for a while. The watch ticked. Ms. Vega took Toby's hand and set it on the cloth so he would know how fabric can carry weight without complaint. "Thank you," Maya said, not to anyone in particular. Maybe to the room. Maybe to the thin kindness that threads through bureaucracies when people let it. Stone reached into his pocket and produced a small screwdriver, the kind used to adjust eyeglasses and miracles. He loosened the watch's pin, eased the paracord a notch, and set the face so the crack sat at 12 like a scar turned to the sun. He placed the watch at the center of the banner and stepped back. No one counted the minute. They didn't have to. Silence makes its own clock when you let it. The minute was exactly as long as it needed to be. When they opened the door again, the hall smelled like floor wax and relief. The clerk at the desk looked up and nodded them through with a face that had learned to respect what it didn't need to understand. Outside, they walked the bikes. Rubber whispered on gravel, engines idling low. The quiet convoy slid into the street like a thought leaving a crowded room. They took back ways, no sirens, no extra eyes. The desert held them the way it holds everything that doesn't demand a spotlight. They didn't go far. There was a rise of sand outside town where people watched meteor showers in August and lightning in July. Ridge stopped there, and the others pulled in. They shut the engines. The sky came forward the way it does when noise is gone. Stone took off his helmet and set it on his seat. "We'll be here when the call comes," he said. "It will come," Maya answered, believing it because belief was a choice and she had made hers. He won't go alone again. On the way back, Maya thought about how many names she had filed that would stay in drawers, how many stories ended with a line that read, "No next of kin." It was not her job to fix that line. It was her job to notice it. Tonight she had noticed it with others. That mattered. Ridge pulled to the curb in front of the library and sat there long enough to feel the way buildings hold on to day heat. He pictured the ledger and the sketch and the watch on the banner. He pictured the man as he must have been, shoulders square even when everything else slouched. "We won't be late," he said to no one, or to the boy he used to be, or to an empty chair at a table in the back of a library. Calendar squares lifted and fell. Calls were made. Forms were walked from one desk to another instead of pushed. In a federal building far away, someone read a request and traced a line from a name to a number, from a number to a unit, from a unit to dates that stitched across years that had once been weather and sleep and chow and boots. The word came back through the same wires that carry the ordinary. It didn't light up a room. It clicked into a system and landed on Maya's screen with a soft chime. She printed the confirmation and held the paper just long enough to make sure the letters were real and in the right order. Then she called the cemetery. Then she called Ridge. "It's time," she said. "Good," he answered. "We'll be here." They had shown up as friends. They would show up again as the same. The difference would be that this time there would be a flag that belonged where it was going, and a watch in a glass box, and a sketch behind the glass. the graphite ready to outlast them all. They had days, not weeks. They used them well. The cemetery's notice went up on a Tuesday when the wind was already leaning hard on the flagpole. The groundskeeper brushed dust from a row of folding chairs and made sure the water jug had cups stacked like white bells. Soon Mesa showed up the way small towns do, one at a time, early enough to be late to something else. The county honor detail wore clean shirts, not dress blues, but they stood straight in the way that counts. Ridge and Stone arrived on the far side of the gravel, helmets hooked on their fingers, jackets unmarked. They were joined by a handful of riders who had learned the same quiet. Ms. Vega came with a shoebox wrapped in brown paper. Toby carried a frame under his arm with the careful solemnity of a boy who understands he is helping to carry the day. Maya stood by the lectern, the confirmation letter folded in thirds in her pocket, unnecessary now and still important. They did not speak about the first room in the field banner. There are rooms that keep their own counsel. The ceremony here belonged to sunlight, and to rules that, when finally met, feel less like rules and more like a way of saying, "We were waiting for you." A folded flag waited on a table draped in green cloth. It had corners the color of midnight and a white that knew how to hold its breath. A county chaplain spoke a short blessing that did not pretend to know the whole shape of a life. The words did not try to be larger than the wind. They were small and sufficient. Maya read the name, full this time, the way paper wanted it. Caleb Rowan. She said the dates that had come back through the wires, and she did not say the other dates that mattered. The library hours, the days he fixed somebody's fan belt without leaving a bill, the Friday mornings when he handed a stranger the only umbrella he owned because the sky had made an unrepeatable decision. Some histories are kept in rooms without microphones. The honor detail lifted the flag, and the air shifted the way it does when people decide together to be careful. They folded the cloth in the practiced geometry that turns fabric into a kind of memory. Each fold caught light across its spine. Each turn said, "We are making a container for something that cannot be contained." Ridge watched the hands and remembered other hands. Stone kept his eyes on the crease where white disappeared and then returned in a star. When the flag stood whole again in its triangular certainty, the leader of the detail paused, as if to confirm that what should be done was being done. There was no next of kin to receive it. The county would hold it in trust unless someone stepped forward with the right papers and the right grief. Maya had thought hard about that line. She had not found a way to make it kinder. The leader nodded to her. She nodded back. "On behalf of a grateful county," the leader said, "we present this flag." And then he let the sentence find the safest ground. Maya stepped forward and accepted the weight for a moment, not as owner, but as bearer. The fabric was warmer than she expected, as if it had learned how to keep sun in its folds. Ms. Vega opened the brown paper. Inside was a shallow glass case with a velvet base the color of new suits. Stone handed her the watch, set now to run without biting at the strap. She placed it inside the case, centered, the crack like a healed seam. Toby slid his drawing into the back slot where the glass would catch it. Not as a label, not as proof, just as a quiet companion. He smoothed the corner with his thumb. The boy stepped away with a kind of reverence that looked nothing like the pictures people often take of reverence, but felt truer than most of them. No rifles fired. The quiet did the work. If anyone cried, it was done the way rain happens in dry states, quickly, honestly, and in a way that leaves no mess for the next person to step in. The chaplain closed the book. The groundskeeper took off his cap, The wind tugged and then gave up, as if it had learned its place. After, people spoke in low voices about practical things. The case would go first to the library. Ms. Vega already had a space cleared on a shelf near the back, where sunlight did not get direct, where dust could be kept honest. Later, it might move to the small veteran desk at the county office, where the watch could tick for anyone who needed to hear that sound. The flag would rest in a display at the cemetery office until policy said otherwise. Ridge touched the glass and then touched his chest, because some gestures require two surfaces to conduct. He did not linger. Neither did Stone. When the gravel settled and the chairs were folded, the riders walked their bikes again and slid back out of notice. Maya stayed, filed the last pages, and watched the box until the watch hand stepped over the minute, proof that time had not ended here, only rejoined its rightful speed. At dusk, they gathered in the garage where the air was hot with a day's worth of work. No patches, no colors. A pot of coffee that had been reheated one time too many. Ridge stood at the workbench and spoke like a man telling a recipe he trusted. "We were in time because we were already moving," he said. "We can't wait for a call that may not know our number. We'll make a list. Each month, one of us checks the county notices, the unclaimed, the unspoken for. If there's a name that looks like it might have ridden close to us, we go as friends. If there's a name that has no one at all, we go as friends." He looked at Stone, who nodded and added the only instruction that mattered. Quiet. They named it the Quiet Watch, because names help us remember that good things require work, and because the room did not need something louder. Toby, who had come with Ms. Vega to bring back the empty shoebox, lifted his hand like students do when their bodies know they are not yet men and want to be useful anyway. "Can I check too?" he asked. Ridge smiled the way men do when they see a younger version of the part of themselves they were proudest of. "You can read the board," he said. "You can bring what you find to Miss Vega or to Maya, and when you're old enough to ride, you can make the coffee." Toby looked at the coffee like a prize he had not expected to want and nodded solemnly, which made three people laugh softly in a room that had only held motors and grief all day. On a morning exactly like the one that opened this story, thin light, vents humming, paper crisp. Maya set a new file beside her keyboard and did not flinch at the blank parts. She had a routine now that thought of the Quiet Watch before she had to ask for it. Within a month, a clerk in another county emailed Maya for the template. Quiet traveled. She reached for the phone. It rang once before Ridge answered, which told her what she needed to know about how people hold a promise when it has settled into their bones. "We're already looking," he said. "Send what you have." Ridge rode out to the rise of sand again in the blue hour and cut his engine. He watched the town with its few lights and long shadows and thought about how much of what saves us does its saving between one breath and the next, where nobody can take a picture. He did not say Caleb's name. He did not need to. He had already said it exactly as many times as it required to be carried forward. He stayed until even the crickets gave up. Then he turned the key, and the bike settled into a low, steady idle. He headed back the long way, where the road teaches you that the shortest distance between 2 points is not always the one that gets you home. People paused, not in a "what's this" way, in the way you stop when something in your chest recognizes kin. A woman who sorted paperbacks by author instead of genre touched the glass lightly and whispered that her brother had worn a watch just like that in a different decade, with different sand. A man who came in mostly for the air conditioning leaned on the cart, and talked to Ms. Vega about the cost of bands and how the cheap ones pinch. Toby learned to stand nearby without hovering, ready to answer a question if a question came, ready to keep silent if what was needed was the quiet that lets memory say its piece. On a Thursday that smelled like hot pennies, a file landed on Maya's desk with the familiar blank lines and a different kind of weight. The man was older. The details were fewer. There was no watch. There was a bus pass that had expired last winter and a folded receipt for a sandwich never eaten. Maya did what she always did now. She called Ridge. She called Stone. She walked to the library and told Ms. Vega in the same tone she used for the weather, serious but not panicked. Toby looked up from the table where he was teaching a smaller kid how to block print the alphabet and put his pencil behind his ear as if inching closer to responsibility. They met at the office and read the lines they were allowed to read. This time there was a name without vowels where a vowel wanted to be, a birthplace far away, a year that put the man's prime in a war most Americans hold at arm's length. The records request went out anyway. The hold went in. The rules said what they always say. The room let them do what they could within those lines. No banner came out of any pack. No physical object stood up and said, "Remember me." The proof, when it came through the wires with the same soft chime. It was enough. The ceremony looked like the last one in all the ways that matter. Careful hands, clean shirts, a triangle of cloth that knew its business, silence doing work no speech could match. If you squinted, you could pretend it was the same day continuing itself after a nap. That is another kind of mercy. Repetition that turns good into normal. Near midnight, the wind changed. Weather does that, ends chapters while pretending it's just moving air around. The next morning smelled less like dust. Kids dragged backpacks that didn't squeal as loud. A man in a straw hat bought 2 cups of coffee and left one on the library's back step without a note. Ms. Vega found it before the ants did. She set it on the desk and decided that small, unclaimed kindnesses are the kind of property she would volunteer to inventory. This time, the name on the notice did not trace back to military service. They went anyway, with the same quiet care, a small room, careful hands, and no spotlight, and left the place less lonely. The form of care held. In bed, before sleep found him, Ridge pictured the first room again. Not to reopen it, to thank it. It had taught him that some silences are a kind of invitation. He'd learned to accept those. He planned to keep learning. If the phone rang in the morning, he would answer it. If it didn't, he would check the board anyway. That was the whole job. Check the board. Show up. Carry a corner. Leave the place better than you found it. Repeat. When a story closes, it's tempting to stand it up straight and make it salute. This one refuses. It sits down in a familiar chair instead. It watches the light move across the floor. It waits for the right moment to get up and do the next necessary thing. In a hard town, the quietest things carry the most weight. A folded flag. A watch that runs a beat slow and keeps perfect time anyway. A ledger with a name that repeats just often enough to mark a life. A phone picked up on the first ring, not because someone demanded it, but because someone was already listening. If stories like this matter to you, if the sound of a room deciding to be careful lands somewhere you can feel, subscribe to This Really Happened. A single share helps another veteran's name be remembered, another watch find its case, another corner get carried when it wants to drag. Thank you for staying with the quiet long enough to hear what it had to say.